machines are about precision. It's going to give you the best precision. So, but I think the greatest point you made is the greatest superpower we have is actually clarity of thought in the age of AI. The clarity of thought sounds like it's easy, but it's not. Right? It's like, it's easy. Just say what you mean. And then when you start thinking about what you mean, you have to say, did I really mean that? And you really go through it. So what I found helpful and what we work with executives on is going through that and then showing how to actually use AI to do that.
As human beings, as physical beings in a physical world, a lot of that physical to digital interface is overlooked in many cases. And I think that's where designers, engineers, developers, you need this cross-functional team to work together so that you're not missing one of those facets. The leaders of the company I was working at put a lot of trust in me to go and represent them in the field and collect that kind of feedback and bring it to the engineering team and say, how do we design and engineer a better product? And that was a very formative experience for me, because what I learned was, if you aren't interfacing with your real users, the nurse, for example, and seeing how they interact with your product, then you miss major opportunities for insight.
But it's tempting in this current environment for people to think they can skip that experience, right? To say, well, we have enough data, we don't necessarily need the real human interaction on the ground. We just rely on artificial intelligence, we rely on the data on the ground, but not necessarily, we don't need to do that level of touch anymore. That's the argument.
And when I think about prompt engineering, it's incredibly similar. But if you go through any kind of management training course, you'll find that virtually every human struggles with delegation. Yes. We all think we can do it better. We all think we can do it faster. And we are asking AI to then take that over for us.
That's right.
So
Welcome to Disruption Now. I'm your host and moderator, Rob Richardson. With me is my friend who's the CEO of Kaleidoscope Innovation. They are a design, engineering, and development firm, all those things together. So they help develop, design, and really bring things to life, from both being able to have prototypes to being able to do some of the most complex things in engineering, but also making sure that there's actually real design behind it. As always, though, before we get into the interview, I want to ask you to like and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. If you're listening to us on podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, please write a review. Really save us. That's how more people learn about disruption. And our goal, of course, is to make sure that technology is human-centric and accessible to all. So that's the reason why we're bringing in a leader from a firm that talks about design and engineering, and see the two as actually complementing each other. Ben, good to have you, brother.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Yeah, good to have you on. So, I really want to kind of let people know how you got into this line of work. So what brought you to this path? How did you get on the path to Kaleidoscope? What was that story?
So I'm a biomedical engineer by training from the University of Cincinnati, and had an amazing co-op experience through UC's engineering program. And a big part of that was going out into the world, visiting hospitals, going into open heart surgeries, and seeing how surgeons, nurses, and scrub technicians were interacting with our products. And this was just a world-class experience, something I never expected as an engineering student to have the opportunity in. And it was because and very often, at least in my training, we were taught to, think about the physician, think about the surgeon as the real subject matter expert. Well, it turns out they don't often run this equipment that is in their operating room. They might be the one who's manipulating the tissue or sewing or using the end effector of this device, but it's the nurse, it's the scrub technician, it's everyone else in the room who's actually running the equipment. So when it was time to look for an opportunity of where do I want to take my career, I found Kaleidoscope Innovation, where they flipped that script from what I was experienced in, where engineers were, of course, a large part of the project team, but they start with design. They start with industrial design, user experience design, and importantly, design and market research.
Yes.
You have to be talking to the humans who are on the other end of whatever technology you're creating. And that's true in a surgical environment. It's true in a manufacturing environment. It's true for software technology. If you're not actually meeting your human user where they're at, then there's a very good chance you engineer a product that might technically work, but it doesn't solve their problem because you've missed that human experience.
And I thought it's very tempting in this world, and we're going to talk more. We obviously talk about AI a lot, But it's tempting in this current environment for people to think they can skip that experience, right? To say, well, we have enough data. We don't necessarily need the real human interaction on the ground. We just rely on artificial intelligence. We rely on the data on the ground, but not necessarily, we don't need to do that level of touch anymore. That's the argument, right? What is your response to people when they say that?
I think it's a natural inclination. And with these tools, it becomes easier and easier to not have to leave your desk to design or engineer something, to write code. But I think the fallacy there is that when the rubber hits the road and that person on the other end of the screen, or the person who's deploying your technology in their warehouse or wherever they might be, then you find the usability problems crop up. And we often talk about technology as what efficiencies can it gain, what kind of optimization can it offer. But the reality is, if it's not usable, if it's not intuitive, if it isn't actually solving a workflow issue, then you're not going to have it be adopted. And so all of this optimization and efficiency you've spent hundreds or thousands of hours creating goes to waste because the people at the other end say, I've got other things to worry about. I can't learn this new piece of equipment, or they've clearly misunderstood how I operate in my environment. And I think we as human beings, as physical beings in a physical world, a lot of that physical to digital interface is overlooked in many cases. And I think that's where designers, engineers, developers, you need this cross-functional team to work together so that you're not missing one of those facets. And if one of those legs of the stool comes off, the whole stool falls over. And I think your product gets thrown on the heap of other products that maybe it was interesting, but it never reached the level of adoption to be meaningful.
Exactly. And when people think about AI, just really kind of honing in on a few things that you said here, it's very interesting because I've seen the fact that, all right, if you might have this, let's go to one point you kind of talked about, if the customer is not satisfied, right? What happens if you deploy an agent, you deploy a chatbot, whatever you want to say, and your customer is angry? Are you going to say that was, and the AI did something that wasn't correct? You can't say as a company, well, that was my agent. That wasn't really us. It's like, no, that's your technology. And so there will always be, I think, we're seeing, if you talk to the Sam Altmans of the world and those folks, they believe like this customer experience part you can get AI, that the AI is going to take care of all of that. I don't think so. It's one of my things. I'm thinking that actually people are still going to want to know and talk to people, especially when they have a problem. Right. And you're going to have to navigate things that aren't obvious on the surface. So there will be the need to, even if it's less humans, there'll be a need to be more intentional about how you're designing something that actually is not human. But then you got to still make sure you're looking at humans. So I agree with you on that. So it's just kind of building on what you just talked about too. So let me ask this question. There's a study that came out from MIT recently that said 95% of AI projects have actually been a failure. Now, they didn't give us the data cite to it. I believe there's a lot of truth in that based upon my knowledge of it. It's why we focus a lot on AI kind of change management, almost like a way to have people think about the approach and design from the regular human way, but AI to human, and really kind of shaping a different way. And you have to almost design a different, I think, experience with your workplace. That's my theory. I love to hear your thoughts on this. 95% of, according to MIT, AI projects in the last year or so have failed to see a real ROI. What's your thoughts from, obviously, a leader in a large company? What do you see and what's your thoughts on that?
It's a really good question because there's, as part of that MIT study, some questions I would have for them are, what are the goals, the endpoints? How are they measuring the ROIs on these? Because I also think we as business leaders have far too high of expectations for what these very nascent, relatively new tools are able to do. And I think we're also underestimating how long of a cycle it might take to see real results. And depending on the application of AI, you can see some immediate results when your data researcher, your human-centered design researcher is able to crunch through a lot more qualitative data quickly. And that means that she can spend more time with the real users, interviewing them, doing the human-to-human connection, allow the AI to take that workload. That's a pretty immediate response you can get. But as you start layering it into more and more complex business models, systems where we're expecting agents, AI agents to come in and totally revolutionize things overnight, I think we also have to remember that we're going to be beholden to the weakest link in our systems. So no matter how good the AI agent is, if the rest of your business systems are antiquated, or maybe your data is not structured, you're not on cloud, your own human managed processes aren't efficient, your agentic AI can only go so far. Just as if you recruited the world's best operations leader into the team, they're not going to fix things overnight. It's going to take time. You're going to have to change processes. And you're going to realize that one solution in one area isn't going to be the end-all be-all. You've got to raise the tide on all of your systems. And I think we see this in business processes, whether we're talking about a legal team, a finance team, R&D. You'll see it in product too, where if the product is being launched into an environment that isn't quite ready for it, it means it's not solving an imminent problem, an imminent need right now. And I think this is where we've got to make sure we're investing into the right kinds of technologies to meet us where we're at in our, whether it's a business or an industry that we're trying to serve, and making sure that we manage those expectations too. So I think we're in this point of not quite the trough of disillusionment regarding the technology, but we're realizing how should we manage our own expectations and what kind of investments are going to be needed to really see meaningful outcomes.
I think that's well stated. When we talk to folks about AI, it's a lot of what you said, and there's a rush to implement the technology without really understanding how to do it correctly, right? So we like to say there's 4 P's you get to before you ever get to the T, which is the technology. And this is even more so for AI, because AI, I believe, at its potential, and it can do this, and there are some firms that do this, but most do not. It really changes how you work and create together, help you do better collective intelligence. But to do that, to your point, it takes 4 things. Number 1, people. It still takes people, right? And you have to educate your internal staff, and then you have to also inform your constituents, like your customers, whoever those people are. Now, customers originally say they don't like AI, but I think you build better trust when you educate people about how it's helping them, what you're going through, and why you're doing this, right? But a lot of companies didn't do that. Number 2, processes. You've already got through that, right? Number 3, problem set. You said that, right? Making a neural-specific problem. Don't try to apply AI to everything. And the only thing that was missing from what you're saying, from what you talked about, is policy, right? Which is extremely important with AI. Going back to people, if your people aren't educated on actually AI digital literacy, I have to say that, because everybody, before I get to policy, everybody in your team needs to have a level of AI digital literacy. Prompting, it still matters. It's a team sport, and how you prompt can get you 2x versus 10x. And then when you get to the next level, let me go down this really quick. In order to actually do an agent right, you have to know how to first time, because the idea of an agent is it has to do that over and over again. So you better get very clear on what you're trying to do. But the last part, policy, like you're essentially raising a thinking individual here that will go off and make decisions. And you need to root it in your philosophies. You need to have ethical guidelines, despite the fact that the U.S. doesn't have any guidelines. That doesn't matter. Some states do. And more importantly, you as an organization hopefully have some guidelines, right? And that needs to be built into the process. But I think there was a rush with AI. Everybody saw, oh my gosh, we can do this. How quickly can we replace people? And there was no real thought to actually how to go about this process in a way that had meaningful return. So I think that's all.
And just speaking from a place at Kaleidoscope Innovation, we almost exclusively work in highly regulated industries where we're talking medical devices, pharmaceutical, aviation and aerospace, industrial energy sector kinds of projects, big engineering projects. And even when you get into people's homes with consumer electronics, consumer packaged goods, there's a level of expectation that brand that someone is bringing into their home is trustworthy. And the expectation on us as product designers and product developers is that we're going to only apply tools that allow us to develop them in trustworthy ways. And there's an element of intellectual property law, of course, included in there. There's an element of verifiability and explainability.
The explainability is people understand.
The Kaleidoscope team, I'm not an expert in this.
Okay.
We spent the morning yesterday with Dr. Kelly Cohen's lab here at UC
Yes.
In fuzzy systems. Explainability, meaning AI not as a black box,
Right.
but that you can zoom in and say, as an algorithm is sorting data, maybe it's breast cancer biopsies, maybe it's cybersecurity data, you can quickly understand why did the algorithm put this data piece into this bucket, and you can see how it's weighting across different measures. So it's explainable to us as humans. It's always explainable to the machine because it can parse thousands of rules all in a split second.
Exactly.
We can't. And so when we are having to explain this to lawmakers or to regulators, to the FDA, or to the human who's trying to use the system, maybe it's a manufacturing operator, we have to be able to explain, here's why the algorithm chose to make this certain decision.
Exactly.
So you talked about data literacy or digital literacy and prompt engineering and so on. And I think there's an interesting human education element that comes into play here. Because when I think about my own prompt engineering skills or lack thereof, I often am reminded that one of the things I struggle with as a leader, always have, is delegation. How do I describe a task? How do I trust another person to execute this task? How much boundary do I give? How many rules? And how much autonomy do I give? And when I think about prompt engineering, it's incredibly similar. But if you go through any kind of management training course, you'll find that virtually every human struggles with delegation.
Yes.
We all think we can do it better. We all think we can do it faster. And we are asking AI to then take that over for us.
That's right.
So I think not only is there a technical element of how do I get this algorithm to provide the outcome that I expect of it, and do I understand the outcome that it's given and why, but am I even explaining myself well enough? And am I delegating the right things? And I think in management training courses too, you're often talking about just because you can pass something along doesn't mean you should. And just because you're the best person to work on something doesn't mean you should be the only person who works on it. And so what are we asking of artificial intelligence to parse through for us? We've got to be really careful that we don't give away all of our judgment and our nuance, because we bring a lot of, our brains are incredibly good synthesizers of the world. And if we offload all of that onto these systems, then I think we really lose a lot of the humanity and therefore a lot of the value that could be coming out of these potential solutions.
Yeah, there's, I don't, to your point, even if we tried to offload our nuance, I don't think we could, because machines think differently from humans and always will. It doesn't mean we can't train it to understand how we think. I think there's a power with that, but there's always going to be some level of nuance. Machines are about precision. It's going to give you the best precision. But I think the greatest point you made is the greatest superpower we have is actually clarity of thought in the age of AI. But clarity of thought sounds like it's easy, but it's not. Right? It's like, it's easy. Just say what you mean. And then when you start thinking about what you mean, you have to say, did I really mean that? And you really go through it. So what I found helpful and what we work with executives on is going through that and then showing how to actually use AI to do that, right? Because there are actually systems and prompts you can put together already to help you go through and think clearly. So whenever I go through a prompt, I have a series of actual other prompts to help plan and execute, right? Before I ever do that. The most powerful statements, you may know this already, but I'll tell you just in case for the audience. One of the most powerful statements you can do with any LLM and AI is at the end of your prompt, because AI is biased, almost like humans, towards what you said at the very beginning. And then at the very end, that's what it really remembers. So you always, if you do this at the end of your prompt, you'll have much better, preciser prompts. Ask me any clarifying questions until you're 95% certain of how to complete the task. That one thing will then start, because then it'll start asking all these questions that help you get clear on thought. You can do that, and then you can take it further. I won't go down a rabbit hole, but you can basically have these kind of already prompts, because humans are better kind of talking through things, right? We have our own love language. AI has its own love language too. It knows how to speak to itself. So you literally use prompts to talk back to it to help you get a better response. So once people understand that we have to get, like you said, clarity of thought and what the hell we want first, and then we have to understand how to communicate that back to AI and operationalize that. That's the part I think that people miss, and because we're bad at getting clarity of thought. As you said, we're bad at delegating. So now we have to become better at that. If we actually master that, the technology becomes relatively easy. So I would love, let's talk a little bit about kind of this friction like we're kind of having with AI and specifically with designers. When we're talking to designers nowadays and folks that are designing experiences and products, you touched on this a little bit, but how do you differentiate who's actually a quality designer now and who isn't? Because we have tools that obviously can fake the funk. It could put out things that look like they put effort into it, but they don't necessarily have that nuance. And you can't necessarily tell by a product or work, or maybe you can. How do you go with designers to really look at that? And really, I would say this with workers overall, like, because you could probably have people have their resume. You might get, I don't know how many resumes you get. They're probably a lot more than you used to. How do you differentiate that and know that this is a quality person that understands the qualities that are important to Kaleidoscope, whatever that is, design, critical thinking? How do you measure that, given it's so difficult when people can just produce something that looks like it's pristine?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's my wife works in education, and I often hear about kind of I'll describe it as an arms race of how do you stay ahead of the students who are using AI. And it sounds like, how do you stay ahead of, 20 years ago, the kids with these graphing calculators. Yeah. Before that, it's what about the slide rule? And so there's always going to be these new technologies, and it's going to help, I think, students or any professionals create better, create faster. And so certainly there's an element when we're looking at, take a designer as an example. We hire industrial design, graphic design, user experience design research, really exceptional professionals across the experience band too. Some are in school. There are co-op students and our interns. Some are new grads. Some have 15, 20, 30 years of experience. And of course, you expect to see different kind of work from each of those groups. So one of the questions we often ask is, does this make sense for where this person's at in their career? Don't expect one output from a group that they're not in. And sometimes there's the obvious stuff like, there's, 7 fingers on that hand. This bracket doesn't line. There's nothing holding it up. But that's the easy stuff to look through. The harder piece is when we do a portfolio review, or we put an engineer through a skills test and we actually have them live create something for us. You're looking for process. You're looking for, how do they think? What is their philosophy? What is their curiosity? Are they asking good questions? That's usually a lot better of a determinant than, are they able to click the mouse and, manage through these screens in CAD or something to make a design. And if I often think about some of the world's famous designers and architects and creators, and you see them sketch something up and you're like, oh, I'm about to watch an artist at work. And it's the most simple diagram and, line drawings. And clearly, obviously, they're not putting a lot of time in it.
Right.
But what we value in that person is not necessarily their technical ability to draw a perfect circle. Computer can do that. What we're asking that person to do is, how do I apply my skills as a designer to think about what problems the world needs solved and ask the right questions to get me to a reasonable, practical solution to solve that problem? So it's a lot more about the soft skills. It's a lot more about the mindset, the tenacity, the curiosity, than it is how good are they with this computer program these days.
Yeah, I think that's great. When you think about AI and the opportunities it brings, obviously mass-produced information. The challenge it brings to an employer and folks like yourself is that you can get flooded with all of these resumes and things that look like they're legit, right? So I think the answer to that is, you have to replace artificial intelligence with something that can never be artificial, right? Like in person, like you can't fake that, right? We can't fake what we're doing here. You can't fake in real life. You can't fake so much, right? Especially against people that know how to ask and probe questions, right? So I think it's those in real life experiences, how they know how to interact with people, do they know how, if you ask them an open-ended question, what values best shaped you, and they have trouble formulating an answer, that, okay, maybe they can't think on their feet. These are things that like you can't fake, right? So I think there's a lot of struggle, particularly in the latest generation, and I don't want to be too critical of them because I think they've been handed the situation they've been handed with a lot of Gen Zers. It's the fact that they're the first kind of digitally native whole kind of generation that's grown up from internet from right when they got out the crib. It's right now. And there's a lot of great things to that in that they're more digitally native. But I think there is some struggle to face-to-face, in-person overall, right? I'm making a generalization. Met lots of great people in the generation, but overall, as a just observation, every generation has its own challenges. Millennials have, Gen Xers have, baby boomers have. I feel like Gen Zers are having this kind of a work interaction. How do you advise? What do you look for in your new emerging workers, right, in Gen Zers? And what advice would you give those who are just starting? Like, take yourself back to young Ben. What advice would you give them? What advice might you ignore for kind of people that are just kind of coming into the workforce in this kind of very rapidly transitioning time?
That's such a hard question to answer. I'm a millennial, and so I often my hair bristles when I'm attacked as millennials are killing the mortgage economy or something, or we eat too much avocado toast. I'm careful about putting that on, a Gen Z generation too. But I think the point is accurate of each generation is going to have its own proclivities or tendencies. And that's going to interface with the preceding and following generations in unexpected ways. So I think the best piece of advice I would have given myself is it's advice I got from my dad. So it's not even my own. It's pay attention. Look at the people around you. How are they acting? How do they carry themselves? Who are people you respect, whether they're like you or not? And I think even better if they're not like you. And they challenge your expectation of how do I carry myself in this world, and how do I uplift people around me? And emulate that to the extent that it feels comfortable to you. You still got to be yourself. And I think with Gen Z, I'm careful about making broad predictions, but if they are more comfortable interacting with each other in digital ways than our generations are, that will work for them when they are the primary generation in the workforce. But it will take some time for that to become the normal. And there will still be boomers and Xers and millennials who are back in my day, we had face-to-face meetings. And so what I would encourage them to do is break out of your comfort zone a little bit, have some empathy with us millennials who don't quite understand, but at the same time, look at what is working really well right now in your workplace and find ways to navigate that, which might make you a little bit uncomfortable. And I think we owe it to them too, to do the same. And it's all about this whole theme of empathy, I think, perfuses everything. Whether you're designing a product or you're designing a workplace, you have to create a culture that is evolutionary by nature. And I'm a firm believer that a company's culture or an organization's culture will change no matter what. The question is it evolving into something you want it to be? And that's where it comes to values, in my mind. Principles, not so much how do we have meetings with each other, but at the core, what do I believe about our relationship? Am I humble? Do I have the humility to believe you have something to offer that I don't know? And vice versa, are you collaborative with me? Are we both tenacious in wanting to solve this problem? And if we hold these common values, then we'll find a way to work together. The rest is just blocking and tackling of how do you structure a company's common practices. So this is a very long answer. It's not really an answer because I don't know. It feels like the generational problem that we'll always have. But I think as humans, we've got to be comfortable with ourselves and then be observant of how do we fit into the world and how can we shape it in ways that are beneficial.
I feel the one thing that is different in this time, and this is not any generation, this is all generations are affected by this. We've talked about the great opportunities with AI. I believe one of the greatest challenges is really how we interact together, specifically on social media, right?
Yeah,
because that algorithm goal is singular. How do we get engagement? It doesn't ask, how do we do it in an empathetic way? It doesn't ask, how does it affect society? It doesn't ask, how does it affect relationships? So I believe it feels like empathy is more challenging now than it has been, right? Because of, not that human beings don't have empathy. We do. We also have all the other problems human beings have, right? And the current environment within interaction, which is still a lot of social media, whether we accept it or not, it's just true, is that you are incentivized towards outrage. You're incentivized to do things and to participate in things that reconfirm not empathy for understanding different perspectives, but reinforcing that you were always right. So my question to that is, in this climate of how do we not lose empathy given the state of the current climate? How do you, as a leader, and you are a leader, how do you try to reinforce that all the time with this new kind of challenge? Human beings have always done crazy things, have always challenged people, have always done things that are not helpful to human beings. It's just, we've also done great things. What's new is there wasn't like something outside of humans driving humans to do things against each other. So given that, how do you kind of balance this in terms of not losing empathy with the more and more advancement in technology in terms of algorithms?
In a single word, I think it's exposure. And in a business like ours, like Kaleidoscope Innovation, where we've got to create something by bringing a lot of very different people, different backgrounds, different educational experiences, different life experiences together to make something net new. It's all about friction. They have to be exposed to each other. I think one of the things that righteous outrage thrives on is division. There supposed to be an other group. And it's even better if you don't really know who that other is. Because then it's so much easier to just say, I'm right, they're wrong. Clearly, I have the right view of the world. That's a lot harder to do when you actually go and spend time with that person or those people. And I think that's true kind of regardless of what the conflict is, if it's ideological, political, educational, even just simple things. In our world, we face small problems. I call them small problems. Project management timeline. Sure. It's a lot easier to say that person's unreasonable, I'm correct. But when you actually get in a room and you understand why they think their version of the timeline is correct and yours is incorrect, you find out there's a lot more gray in between, and you can work through that. But you have to, in some cases, force this exposure because it is very easy to stay behind the computer screen and just send off a quick, terse, maybe rude email or something. It's a lot harder to do that sitting face to face. Now, that's not always practical either. Yeah. Our companies are global. We're in Cincinnati. We have an office in Boston, Dallas, Seattle. Our clients are all over the world. That's easier said than done. And so you have to find what are the proxies for that.
Yeah.
And I actually think one of the great outcomes of COVID is the use, great and painful, is the use of video conferencing.
Yeah. Because
while it's exhausting sitting in front of a camera all day long, you can actually read a little bit more information about this person in their body language.
Absolutely.
You can read how they're responding to your comments. And that is very helpful in a creative business like our own, where our engineers have to really understand the nuances of the manufacturer's perspective, maybe around the other side of the world. And I also think, coming back to the generational differences we talked about, Gen Z or the digital natives might be our saviors in this, because we are the ones who, my generation, the kids whose families maybe got computers when they were 10 or 15 or 20. Right. And we have to figure this out, and we're making a lot of mistakes. The people who grow up with this, it's like breathing to them. Right. And I see, even in my own family, a lot more skepticism in the younger.
Especially Gen Alpha.
They question a lot. Whereas, my older relatives, God love them, they're like, hey, did you see this? Can you believe it? And I'm like, I don't know, that one passes the sniff test. Like, would you mess it up? Yes. Back in my day, we'd use Snopes to figure out if something's real. And I think there's a healthy skepticism that young folk are coming up with, and I think that's going to be good for all of society.
That's well said. And I agree. And I think all generations can learn from each other, right? There's something that we can learn. Gen Z wants to sometimes, generally speaking, wants to be remote all the time. And I think there's some power to that, but there's also, we have to also figure out a way to connect because it's the only way. And there are things that if you're going to have a remote first culture, you have to then do things even more intentional to get to know your coworkers, right? It still doesn't replace us having to figure out what's driving you. Is the culture going the right direction? And you still got to figure out, like, if you're a leader, this is something I didn't really start appreciating until recently. You have to also understand the nature and the psychology of your people and the feeling of the culture. And you can only get that by connecting with them and listening to them. And so it can't always be in person, but If it's not, you have to be even more intentional, right? There are ways to do that, but it's actually sometimes even more work, as we talked about earlier with AI. Like, if you just put stuff out there, you'll get a whole bunch of stuff, but it won't maximize. So you have to be more intentional with what you're saying and what you're doing. It's the same thing, I think, when you talk about a remote culture. It's like it's the same extension. Okay, a couple of rapid fire questions.
Okay.
All right, let's go. All right, this is a tough one. What's one important truth you have that a lot of people disagree with you on?
That people disagree with me on. I don't know. This is tough, Rob. A lot of people in Cincinnati will agree with me, but I think the University of Cincinnati is one of the greatest institutions in the state. I think the collaboration, the Midwest openness, Midwest Con as an example of what can happen in the city, where you're getting policymakers, academics, industry folks, technologists, and futurists all together wanting to solve problems together, and then having the grassroots willpower to do it. I travel a lot for work. I get to meet people all over. It's a special kind of culture that we've got here in the Cincinnati region. So I would say, I don't know that Ohio would agree, right? But I think Cincinnati would at least be with me on this one.
Well, I'll say this. What I think are the important truths you have, knowing you, that many people might not agree with, is that empathy can still be effective.
You answered better than I.
Yeah, right, because I know you, right? It's like a lot of people think that like empathy is something that cannot work. You just have to be cruel, and that's what it takes to get ahead, and just be like mindless and just be driven only by like what's best right now. And you don't seem to be that type of leader. And so like, I think that feels like that's what it, for you, that's an important truth that you definitely have.
Attitude to that, which is, many people might agree with me on this, that I genuinely believe most people are good. Yeah. And you always hear the quote, laws only work for law-abiding citizens. Well, look how many people are law-abiding and how many people actually want to go and help that world. And maybe that's that culture I was speaking to about Cincinnati. But I genuinely believe that's rooted in our desire to want to leave the world a little bit better, and not purely be extractive. We're empathetic to the people who are around us and who are coming after us. And I hope more and more people believe that. I know there's people who don't, but I choose to believe that the world is generally slanted that way.
I believe that the world is slanted towards the direction we bend it. So that's my bias or belief. Yeah. So I would say that when you have an empathetic leader leading, people tend to be more empathetic. Yeah. If you have a non-empathetic leader, people tend, and culture.
And what kind of systems are they building too? Yes. You can have empathetic people working in a discriminatory or harmful system, and no matter how hard they rail against it, unless that system's redesigned, it's an uphill battle.
That's it, because the science has shown that we as individuals, as human beings, we're also tribal. And so our brain gets redirected and reprogrammed to the people that's around us the most. Mm. Right. So if you are a person that seeks to hold these values, the most important thing you can do that has values where you want to be empathetic, you better be around empathetic people, or you really lose your empathy. Like, that's what people don't understand. Like, who you surround yourself with, the environment you put yourself in, the systems we put in place determine the direction of our mind, our life, and our character. Yeah. And that's been principally true since the beginning of time, and I still think that remains true. MidwestCon, what are you looking forward to most with MidwestCon? We're glad to have you. Kaleidoscope as a second-year sponsor again. What are you looking forward to again?
Last year it was a catalyst for us. It's this disparate, special group of people who are artists, they're policymakers, they're technologists, and they genuinely want to share meaningful ideas together. What I really loved about MidwestCon last year was I had virtually no small talk. It's like my worst fear at a conference, like, oh yeah, I got to make small talk for 3 days straight. At MidwestCon, it's deep conversations about how are you seeing change happen in your world, and does that make you hopeful or fearful? And what can we do about that? And I love that there's this element of what can we do about that. It's very action-oriented. You're getting city leaders, industry leaders, students, faculty all together, and I think that's really meaningful. So this year, I'm looking forward to learning. Last year, I'm not an AI expert by any means. I'm a person who uses artificial intelligence. Yeah. And I'm fortunate enough to be surrounded by many deep experts in AI in our business and at Infosys, people who are creating these technologies. So I'm showing up to these conferences to both learn what is the new theories, new academic approaches that are really exciting. I just want to learn. And then how can we apply those? And that's the translation that I love about MidwestCon. And what do we need to do, coming back to our previous question, what do we need to do as citizens and lawmakers to build systems that enable this for good, and that we're creating environments where innovation can happen, but it can happen responsibly and explainably as well?
Absolutely. Okay, a couple of real rapid fire questions for Kaleidoscope. What does success look like 5 years from now for Kaleidoscope?
I tell our folks at Kaleidoscope that my mission is to create Kaleidoscope into the best product development company in the world. Aspirational. We're not there yet. We're a lot bigger, better, stronger than we were 10 years ago. But 5 years from now, I want to look back and be very proud of the intentional decisions we made to make ourselves better. And that might mean more technically rigorous. It might mean more ethically rigorous, having really high quality people continue to join our firm and stay for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. There's a lot of old timers at the company that I'm super proud that we've built this firm together, and want to see a new generation take many of these reins and form it into something that they want it to be. So yes, I still want us to make incredible products that solve problems for people, save lives, make life more delightful, make it more efficient, make it more sustainable for our humanity. But I also want it to be something that our people are very proud of.
All right. Two final questions that are similar. You can just answer back and put in a sentence. What's the one thing AI will certainly change the next 5 years?
AI will change our relationship with Microsoft Excel, without a doubt. It
It's a very specific answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's very good at data analysis. It's very good at turning qualitative data into quantitative data and then giving you outputs of that. And there's a lot of folks. I'm an engineer. I use Excel all the time. Our finance team lives and breathes Excel. But and a lot of the corporate world runs on Microsoft Excel. It's a great product. But I also think it's limiting in the knowledge base that people have with it. And it becomes a really one-dimensional tool. And the reason I say this kind of tongue in cheek is it's also the part that people don't necessarily love about their job. Some people do.
Yeah.
Emily in our accounting department, she's got a whole mug that's about Microsoft Excel. She loves working in the tool.
Right.
But for everyone else, it's a necessary step to really get the answer that they're looking for. And I think conversational or agentic AI, using Excel as one example, is going to change the way we interact with the corporate tools at our disposal. And I think it will allow us to move much more quickly through those tools as long as we can explain it. One of the reasons Excel is the backbone of corporate America is that it's highly explainable, verifiable, validatable, incredibly robust tool. And we've got to get AI to get to that level. And I think it will in the next 5 years.
And you brought up some good points about, how people use data, and some don't just need it to get the answer. And for their lives, it'll be easier. I do think how our work is done is sometimes tied to our identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the challenges that we work people through, because I believe the one thing that's going to change is the nature of work in general. I still think people are saying oh, they're coming for coders. You should just go be a work in construction. I love working construction. You should do it. We need more people in construction. But if you're saying that you think that engineering is not going to matter, design's not going to matter, my prediction in the next 5 years is good designers and good engineers are even going to be even more critical. I actually don't think AI, even when it gets to AGI, if it gets to that, will be able to totally replace that level of there'll be some level of nuance, and there'll be some chaos, if you will, that's created, because when you can do things so fast, there will be things you don't predict. I guarantee it.
I think we're to make the courses people take in ethics and philosophy and what we would have called the humanities a few years ago, it makes it that much more.
Absolutely.
I agree. And thank you. You ask great questions, and I appreciate that your brain works at a different level than mine too.
I wouldn't say that.
And
yeah.
These are the things I wrestle with in working at a place like Kaleidoscope. We've got a lot of deep thinkers and people who are really good technicians and people who are really lofty futurists and
I'm between the two.
future. And we need all of that together.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that AI won't ever change is you need both.
Yeah,
I'm
that's what
excited for the future. I'm optimistic about it.
we're optimistic too. We need more leaders like you. Ben Cole, CEO of Kaleidoscope. As always, thank you and appreciate you, brother.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.